we
Great.
will, look forward to hearing from you today.
Excellent. I'm going to share my screen and we think it works. Maybe it'll work twice in a row. All right. You all still see that? Great. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. I'm one of the crazy people who actually enjoys grant writing. I just want to say first that with the Kavira Coalition, we're working remotely, but I want to acknowledge that I'm living on the ancestral and present day homelands of the Pueblo, Apache, and Diné people. And they're, of course, exceptionally disrupted by COVID-19 as well as other historical inequities. And so one of the things that we do in our work is try to support grant writing in service of Pueblo tribes and peoples. So that's one of the actions that we're trying to do. So more broadly, this often is daunting. Even though I enjoy doing it, it is still daunting. So why am I qualified to give this workshop? I, as I say, actually enjoy this. Maybe this is a helpful reframe for you in approaching this daunting task, but it is a chance to think really big and to be really collaborative. And to, if you are, talking to a group of people and everybody has these ideas, what an amazing opportunity to hear what people are dreaming about for the world. Like, what do people want to see in the world? That to me is incredibly compelling and incredibly exciting. And beyond just your collaborators, it's a chance to bring in the funders, right? Like, if you think about it as you're giving them an opportunity to make this thing happen, it sounds a little bit like a salesperson, but to me, it actually feels very grounding to bring people into this cool idea that you have. So hopefully that's a helpful reframe. Or else I'm just totally crazy and enjoying this. Not only do I enjoy doing this, I do a lot of it. I wrote, I think last count was 18 proposals last year in 2020. 7 of them were funded. So you can see that that's well under half. That's the best funding rate I've ever done in my career. In my research career, I'm well under a 5% success rate, and that's pretty okay for my career stage. So that's to say, the whole point of that is to say that most proposals are not funded, and so don't let that detract you. This is about persistence. So, but there are a couple of tips to help you make it less painful and be more efficient, because it is about numbers, so that you can get them out the door. Likewise, you all in this room, and we're a nice small group for the live session, which is excellent. You all are going to have tips and experience that will be relevant. So please use the chat. If I overlook something that you think is really important, please put it in the chat and we can combine that as a resource going forward for other folks. All right, so here's a whole lot of words on a page. This is the summary of how I approach grant writing. It is not in the order of the final project. So that's a really key thing. The order that I work on things is completely different than the order that it ends up in. To me, this works. I also want to say that this works for me. If it doesn't work for you, find a way that works well for you. But if you have no idea of how to tackle it, maybe try this way, take what you like and leave what you don't. So I'm going to work through this slowly. We're going to tackle the first 3 points here for a second, and then we'll just plug our way on through. All right, so as I mentioned, getting to talk about big ideas is my favorite part, but you have to have this idea in order to write a grant. If sometimes an opportunity will come across your desk, but it's due in 3 weeks, that's not enough time to come up with an idea, find the background that you need to support it, write it and edit it. So it's a really great idea to be thinking of ideas constantly and writing them down, because you will not remember, at least I will not remember if I don't write them down. So a really great way is have listening sessions with your community, have regular check-ins with your collaborators, and it's this time for this sort of conversational time can sometimes the best ideas can emerge and be really what are valuable to the community. As I say, write it down. So keep the running list of project ideas. And then finally, and this gets back to the low funding rate, is you've got to be able to reuse your ideas and your writing until you can reach your outcomes. So for example, I've put 3 different grants in of adding drought shelters to compost plots. None of them have come through now. I'm going to just keep trying because I think it's a really good idea. And so I'm going to keep trying until I can hopefully get that funded soon. So you'll notice all of my tips are in bold, and I'll of course make this presentation available so you don't have to be writing it all down as you go. So you have this great idea. Now you need to find the funding related to your goals. Signing up for listservs is helpful. Lots of people share funding ideas. I'm gonna just check the chat in case I'm going too fast. Oh, there we go. Thanks. So another one that takes more organization, but is really helpful, is start a list of, especially if there's a couple of big programs that you know fund things at the same time of year every year, make a list with those dates so you know to be checking in every year, and make sure you check with enough advance notice. So we have one of these lists here at CRI, and miraculously, I checked about 6 weeks early and going, I wonder if they've released their request for proposals yet. And they had moved up the deadline by about 3 weeks. So luckily, because I had been thinking ahead, I was able to apply for that one, versus if I had waited for it to float across my desk, I probably would have missed the deadline because I was expecting it later. So using your calendar or something like that to just cue you to be checking in on those big grants. I personally don't look directly at grants.gov to find funding, but I suppose you could. Maybe if you all have experience with that or tips, go ahead and put them in the chat. I will pop this great resource in the chat, but I don't want to do it right now because I'll lose the screen, but I will provide this. This is a partner organization that have compiled a list of some great government opportunities. So you find funding related to your goals. So for example, this is a description of one of the requests for proposals, and development and adoption of innovative conservation approaches. Yes, aligns exactly with what I want to do. I found a funding that matches my idea. We're ready to go. So next step, this is definitely you'll notice I'm going to reiterate this a bunch of times. So you need to do an active, that is to say you're not reading it, you're reading it and taking notes of the request for proposals, the RFP. So I always open a working document and I start taking notes on all of these things. And I read the entire thing. If it's 120 pages, I read 120 pages word for word. But I'm taking notes as I do it. So here's some things to take notes on. Make sure you know the deadline and the time zone. So is it due at 5 p.m. Eastern? If you live in California, you only have until 2 p.m. to get it in on the deadline. Does it require a pre-proposal or a letter of intent? Sometimes they have shorter applications as a screen before they enable full applications. And so sometimes if you've missed the deadline for the pre-proposal, you can't apply for the full proposal. And so I've put in here little breadcrumbs of this example request for proposals. So you'll notice that these page numbers are going to be all over the map. And that's why this close read and taking notes is going to be really helpful, because watch what happens next. Oops. Here's some other really important pieces of information. The total funding amount. Oh, well, that's still on page 2. That's great. But then the start date and duration didn't show up until page 9. So these are all really important things to know as you want to figure out the scope of the project you're asking for, and you really have to closely read through to find those. So for example, something might say a floor funding floor. You have to ask for at least $5,000 and you can't ask for more than $50,000, right? You can have between 1 and 3 years of duration, and you have to start this summer. Some of them, the start date isn't for a year or more. Right. So other really common and critical things, sometimes they require multiple states or multiple institutions. And so that's something to look for. In this case, it can be made to a single entity, and then you can have subcontractors. But knowing this ahead of time, again, before you write anything in the actual proposal, this tells you what scope you can ask for. Do I have to find a collaborator in another state, or am I okay on my own? What are the eligibility criteria? So are you even eligible in the institution that you're at? Or do you need to find a collaborator to put in the grant for you? So again, here we're in the land of page 9, page 10. Here's one that we've come across in Quivira because we all have such great ideas. Every once in a while, people in 2 different programs want to apply for the same funding request. And sometimes they allow you to apply for to submit more than one application. That's something to really, really closely read. And then you have to communicate really well with your team and flip a coin or whatever of who gets to submit if you can only submit one. Okay, here we go. Next, of course, you need to closely read what the funding can go towards. There's sometimes limitations about the relative amounts of money for different categories. So for example, sometimes you can only spend 25% on personnel, or you can't buy equipment that costs more than $5,000. So you just need to know that and make sure that that works with what you're proposing. So for example, you're not allowed to do entertainment costs, regardless of the apparent relationship to project objectives. So you can't hire that live band for the outreach event with this funding. Right? There's more to look for. Is match or cost share required, and at what rate? This is probably the biggest headache if you've tried doing this at all. This is always the one that's challenging, and yet is also an opportunity to really build strong connections with your community, with your collaborators, and with your other funders. So it's a double-edged sword. Yes, it's hard to find, but the payoff is the relationships that you're building with these other people moving towards a shared goal. So that's another reframe, a way to think about it to make this process a little more exciting and upbeat. So for example, if you receive $50,000 from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, you also need to find $50,000 from non-federal sources. And I'm going to talk more about what some of those sources may be later, but the dollar amount for a 50% matching grant is 1-to-1. Some of them you need a 25% match. So for a $50,000 grant, you'd have to come up with $25,000. And then I like putting these two together because from talking to some people, I know they're confusing, they're new terms. So they are different. Match is different than indirect or overhead. So indirect or overhead is the grantor's acknowledgement that it takes more to actually do a grant than the line items in the budget. So it's a little bit of wiggle room. You've got to pay for your office space. You have to pay for internet connectivity. You have to, if you have someone helping with your accounting, you have to have some way of paying for all of that, even though you can't line item it in the budget. So it's just a way of the funders acknowledging that you need some of the money that goes towards your organization that's not a direct project outcome or deliverable. And so different grants will have different allowable indirect expenses, and then different agencies will negotiate different rates with different entities. So all of that is super confusing. And if you don't know, they will also just tell you what the default rate is. So if you haven't negotiated anything for this grant, you get to request a 10% overhead rate, which means if I'm asking, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this math in my head. If you're asking for a $100,000 grant, you can ask for about $9,000, give or take, as the indirect or overhead, because 9,000 plus 91,000 gives you a total of 100,000. We'll double check that in the recording. Great. So cost share and match versus indirect and overhead. All right, we are getting closer to the end of my default checklist. So what are the priority topics or activities? This can be a really important thing to look at. Your project might match the scope of the grant, but if you know that there's a limited amount of funding and they're prioritizing something that's not you, then it may not be worth your time to invest quite as much time and energy into this grant. If you do align exactly with the priority topics, receipts, or activities, you want to make sure that is extremely clear to the reviewers. You want them to immediately identify that this person qualifies for all the priorities. So that goes down to my tip. You're going to match the language and the order that they put in the request for proposals as closely as possible so that it's easy for the reviewers to be like, absolutely, this person is a priority candidate, right? So it goes both ways. You can either decide not to invest as much time in a proposal, or you really want to highlight how much of a good fit you are for this opportunity. Right. So you've read all 72 pages, every single word, and you still have questions. This is the part that I'm still not as confident at, but I know it's important, so I'm putting it in here. You can hold me accountable to it. So things like, my project idea is pretty close, but is it worth applying for, or am I unlikely to get this? Or one that actually happened to us, an agency released 2 almost identical calls for proposals. Which one fits best? Which one are we most likely to get? And then this one sometimes happens because people who write the RFPs are human too. In one part of the proposal, it says 10-page limit, and then another part it says 12. What do I do? So the answer is always to call or email the program officer. And so that will also be somewhere in the request for proposals. They'll have the contact. And then also note that this is different from the grants.gov help desk. So that's for that service of how you add the grant to their system. This is for the individual person who's administering this exact opportunity, and they're going to have the most detailed information about that opportunity. Okay, just take a breath. Any questions so far on steps 1, 2, or 3? It's a moment. Feel free to stick them in the chat. And I will keep looking at it, but I'm going to move on. We're going to get towards where it's a little bit more interactive, so you won't just have to listen to me talk the whole time. All right. So the next parts, you'll notice I don't have draft the proposal until way down here at step 7. We've got a lot of work to do still connecting between having an idea and actually writing it. So let's dig into some of these other things. So when I'm working on a grant, I individually am a very objectives-oriented person, and so this works well with my brain. It won't be for everyone. But I'm noticing in grant calls, people are putting, smart objectives in more and more. Like you'll see this language, you'll see SMART objectives. And what that stands for is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And so it serves as a nice checklist to make sure that what you're writing is all of these things. And it shows whoever is reviewing that you've thought through this carefully and that you could actually do it. So here's my example. Our goal is to improve resilience through erosion control. Therefore, I request funding to support 5 ranches in building 1 rock dams in 2021. So is this specific? I said 5 ranches. I said exactly what activity we're doing. Is it measurable? Yes. Someone could walk out to those ranches and see if we built the 1 rock dams. Check. Is it achievable? It might be different if I said we would build 5,000 1 rock dams, but 1 rock dams, but 5, probably pretty achievable in 1 year. Relevant? Well, I've matched 1 rock dams to erosion control. So I've matched the activity to the problem. So hopefully I've shown that that's relevant. And I have said that it's time bound. I'm not going to say that we're going to build 5 over the next whenever. All right, you can hold me accountable. By the end of 2021, you can go walk out on those 5 ranches and find you will find 1 rock dams. So I would like for you all in the chat to try 1 or 2 sentences. Make up it can be an idea you have, or, feel free to make up a fake idea, but just try writing it for a second. So, SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. This will be really compelling on the video later. I will wait. See, and then I can just put Tyler, Sarah, Sam, Taryn on the spot since we work together. When do you guys want to try it?
I'm writing one right now.
Okay.
Hopefully. Well, I'm writing something. I don't know if it'll be to write something.
I'm glad you guys are taking meaningful time. Also, this is really hard to do. I'll say that. Filling all of these criteria in a sensible sentence or 2 sentences is challenging. This is not meant to be something that you can just dash off, and it takes practice. So, but you can definitely get better at it. And as you start thinking about it, it does get easier.
I had notifications popping up in the middle of that I couldn't keep hitting typing, so it's coming, I promise.
No worries. Anyone else got a 1 sentence, or if you want to just say it out loud? Anyone brave? Or a nice small group? I am sure that people are brave, but if you want to feel brave. Ooh, thanks, Andrew. Great.
Well, I decided mid-draft I'd rather say it than write it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I mean, the conundrum we're facing down in Valencia Soil and Water is we have 2 beautiful conservation areas that have been given to us through various ways that sit in quasi-permanent holding pattern because we don't have the resources to plan or manage them. And so we have this one Rio Bajo conservation area just southeast of Berlin that has this beautiful 150-acre cottonwood stand. And so what we're trying to craft is requests for support to go through the planning process on this 150 acres to remove understory of pernicious salt cedar, Russian olive, Siberian elm, and 25 years of forest fall debris underneath. So it's this beautiful asset, but it's as if we're intending it to burn the way it's currently looking. So that's great. That's my RFP sentence, but that's the need that I would try to craft a
great. Yeah, I heard a couple of things. Specific, you want to plan for reducing fire danger. That I would say is, and you know the species that are creating the risk, you know the value and its service. Measurable, if you've produced a plan, check, you can measure that that plan exists. Achievable, yes, in the bounds of these other things. If you're asking for a plan in 2 weeks, that's probably not achievable. And that was the last thing that I didn't hear, is the time bound section. So I would like a plan by June of 2022. That would be very achievable, and it would be time bound. And I think you've really beautifully talked about how relevant that would be. Does that help, that of pulling all of those in? Great, you guys are doing great. All right. Thanks for speaking up, Andrew. That was a great example. Keep them coming, keep practicing. And if we have time at the end, I'm happy to provide a little bit more feedback on SMART objectives. But given that we're halfway through, I'm going to keep going if that's all right. But thank you guys. That's excellent.
Perfect. This is good stuff.
Great. Okay, so, oops, where am I? Okay, SMART objectives. I find this really helpful exercise, a really nice checklist. It feeds directly into, this is something I've been seeing more lately in requests for proposals, is that you provide a logic model. So it's literally, there's different templates. This is a very general one. And you'll see in a second that they can be much more detailed. But the general idea is people want to see that you've thought through what are the inputs, what are the outputs, and what's going to happen in the world as a result of these inputs and outputs. Also, being aware that there's external factors and that you're making some assumptions about how the world is. You know some things about the world that are informing why you think there's inputs, why you think there's outputs. This is a lot to tackle. If you're not used to thinking like this is extremely challenging. It will also take practice, and you will also get better at it as you practice. So I'm going to give an example that's not my own. I just nabbed it off the internet, but I liked it. And just give yourself time and patience to get up to this level of detail. It's not meant to happen immediately. It's designed to slow you down and make you think about your process, about the logic of your project. That's what it's supposed to do. So it's supposed to be time consuming and hard. All right, so here's an example one where they're trying to get improved learning outcomes, right? That's the impact that they're looking at. And you can kind of work backwards here. Here's the inputs. They need funding, which, is what we always need. You need people to do the work. You need their time. If you need specialized expertise, if you don't have that on your team, you need to make sure you bring that on. Here's the activities. This is the easiest one. This is never going to be a problem, right? Our brains are really well designed to be like, I'm going to hold a workshop and I'm going to have a work party to clear out the cottonwood galleries. Like that part, you don't have to worry about that. You're going to come up with that. It's pulling together how these connect to each other, what steps really need to be laid out to make this a logically cohesive proposal. That's the part that's going to take some time. So like I said, you'll see different flavors of these logic models. Again, this is the simplest. You could have 3 columns with the 2 assumptions, or you can have it be much more complex. And so I'll just, feel free to take a moment to read some of these. And this is really something that you have to, I've said it before, it's something you really have to think deeply about, because it's you showing the world that you've thought through these things. And it's how you think about them also. So it really is a great window for a reader or a reviewer to really understand how you took this problem and how you're proposing to solve it. So I think I'm relatively new to these, but I really like them. So we just had you write your SMART objectives. I started with that because that's a nice way to start matching it to your logic model. So for example, in my example, the improve resilience, that's a big outcome, right? That's not something that I'm going to solve with just one project, but that's the direction that I'm trying to go. So that's the impact that I'm hoping to have. The outcome would be controlling erosion, right? That's something sort of measurable on the ground that I can see. That could be a short to medium term outcome. I've got the building 1 rack dams on 5 ranches is the actual activity. So hopefully doing these SMART objectives, if you're staring at this logic model framework and going, I have no idea where to begin, if you've spent a little bit of time on your SMART objectives, you can at least start putting something down. So I'm not going to have you do it in the chat because I think it's a little hard to point arrows and everything, but I invite you to either use this example or find another logic model example on the internet and try to match your SMART objective into this logic model template. Ooh, I'm going to come right to that question right now. Rather, Andrew, I'll come to that question in just a second. So the next thing I do, so we've sort of really turned that stuff around in our brains. Next, we need to know the budget. So you'll notice I still have not written a word of the proposal, not one word. So far, I've done my SMART objectives, my logic model. Now I'm going to the budget. So this can really save you time in the long run. If you only have funding to run one workshop, there's no point in writing about how great having 3 workshops would be, right? So that's why I do the budget really early on. With the caveat that I suggest you write the budget narrative at the very end, because you're probably going to make little tweaks and you don't want to end up with things that don't match. So you want to do the budget narrative at the end. At least that's how I do it. So my tip here, I mean, this is very personal to every organization and every project, but I would build up a consistent template in your organization so that they don't just get so annoyed at you that you give them something different every time. Use a consistent template and then convert it into whatever you need for the granting organization. Also, write yourself lots of notes. So for example, 5 trips, 2,000, instead of just putting in the dollar amount 560, I try to give myself breadcrumbs so I can figure out what I was thinking when I wrote that. And then the next tip is make sure you break out how much you'll need in the quarter of the first year of the project, because you need to put that into one of the forms if you're applying for a federal grant. So I'll show you 2 examples and hopefully make that connect. So here's an example of ours. These codes are our Kavira's internal accounting codes. And so I match up the salaries and wages, IRA contributions, et cetera. Here's my notes to myself. This is how many hours, that's their rate. Here's the total. So you'll see that in my spreadsheets, I have lots of little breadcrumbs to lead me towards how I came to the answer. The other thing I do is build in equations to auto calculate totals and things. So it's a big investment up front to build the spreadsheet out. And then I use it for every grant and it auto populates. And that's wonderful. Here's what the form actually looks like. If you don't have your own internal accounting, you might as well use the categories that you're allowed to use for the grant. So go ahead and look at that first if you don't have one already built internally. So these would be great categories to make sure that your budget has. So here is this other page of the 424A, and here's where you can see you have to put in your forecasted cash needs by quarter in the first year and then in subsequent years. So it's worth, as you're forming this budget, you know, this might be my first pass, and then I'll add columns that break it out by quarter so that I can make sure that I'm able to readily access every piece of information that I'll need for the final. Great. Okay, we've done our logic model, we've done our budget, and now our timeline. So these are another things that I've seen asked for is a Gantt chart or something like that. And it's this visual display of temporal information where you have your task and then the subtasks. I tend to be pretty bare bones, use X's to denote things. You can make them beautiful and color coded. And my guess is that reviewers will probably like to see things that are beautiful and color coded, but it's not something that I invest time in. So these get at the same kind of information, but can be super helpful to like error check yourself. Because if you say that, you know, if it's a 1-year grant and you go, okay, well, I got to have everything done by October of next year, and then you figure out that the way you were conceptualizing something, the timing wasn't going to work out, it's better that you know this now before you write the whole proposal than if you have to change the order of everything or take something out or whatever. So I think doing these couple of things, the logic model, the budget, and the timeline before you write anything will save you time. So getting to Andrew's question, what would you take the time to do the logic model and timeline if they're not required for the grant? I suggest that you do them. Your grant partners and the reviewers are going to be able to tell that you have thought deeply about the project. The more confident that you are in having looked at something every different way, this is the Picasso, right, where he's like looking at his subject from all the different ways at once. That's sort of the model that you want to go towards, is you want to be the most expert of your project and the logic so that you can show that to the reviewers. So hopefully that answers your question. I recommend that you do it, but you know, try it out. If you hate it and it wastes time, then don't do it. But I generally find that it saves me time. All right, so next, bringing in collaborators. Bringing in collaborators is wonderful. Do it as early as possible so that they have time to provide feedback and help guide the direction. You don't want to collaborate and actually just be telling someone what to do. Those are not the same thing, it turns out. So I like to do a few bullet points or paragraphs with the key parts of the ideas to send to other people. Keep it snappy. This is something that I have to tell myself all the time because I'm like, I want to tell you everything. But really what's important is who, what, where, when, why. Again, all that work you did on the SMART objectives will actually get you most of the way there. So I think I have oh, here we go. I almost have an example. Hopefully this goes without saying, but be extremely upfront about whether you're asking people to do something for free or whether you have money available to pay them. I would suggest doing that as part of the very first conversation that you have, so that there's no hurt feelings or misunderstandings. You can also talk about how it's still up for negotiation, but really be upfront about whether it's funded or not. And then make sure that you get it in writing that they agree to that. So here we go. Hello, Sam. Kavir is working on a proposal to improve resilience through erosion control. This ought to look familiar. We're looking for ranches interested in building One Rock dams in 2021. We would provide approximately $1,000 to each ranch to support time and materials, and ask that the ranches provide use of a tractor for 2 days and 1 acre of land as match. Would you be interested in talking more about it? So, given that, take your objective and maybe massage it into a pitch. We'll take maybe 1 minute to do that. If we run out of time, hopefully it's an exercise for you all to do on your own. Nice. I was just reading through the chats that you guys had. These are excellent. Great. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving. Feel free to keep adding to the chat so that people can see what other people are thinking about. So bringing in partners and stakeholders, if you're asking for a letter of support, it's really nice if you draft a template letter and send it around to people to fill in. So, I mean, you'll notice that the primary grant writer is doing a lot of work up front. You know, this is the world we live in. It's not perfect. You do have to do a lot of investment up front, and you don't know if you'll be funded, but it is your role as a grant writer to make it as easy as possible for everyone else. So I like to do a template letter of support with really obvious places where they have to write something. And again, the earlier you can get that to people, the better. I see this pretty frequently. There's a team qualifications section. Sometimes it's just a couple of sentences, and sometimes it's attached a resume, a CV, or a bio sketch. So if there's guidance for what they're requiring, like this is for Science World, the bio sketches are a very specific layout. So make sure you know that ahead of time. My tip here that I've been working to implement here at Quivira is that all staff maintain their CVs in a shared folder, and that all activities are included. So it gets to be a really, really long document. But then for each specific proposal, you can highlight the most relevant experience for that person, and you can make it shorter. So that's one of the tips we're going to moving forward. All right, we have made it to step 5. Great. All right, so I'm going to make a huge caveat that you should make sure that you check with the granting agency or a lawyer for any specifics. But here are some ways that we have gotten match in the past. So cash is a great form of match. So a foundation gives you general funding, and you can use it to support staff salaries. So in that example of a $50,000 from NRCS, you can say XYZ Foundation has given us $50,000, and that's going to support our staff time. That's cash match. It's 1-to-1. Check. Likewise, supplies, you have a projector, so you don't have to rent it. Or like we said, a rancher says they'll let us use their tractor. The value of that time and of that equipment can be used as match. Figuring out what that value is much more challenging. Good luck. Travel. So if you have people coming in for a workshop and they don't get reimbursed for their mileage, that means they're actually donating that amount to the project. Contractors, that is another thing, and especially if you're working with partners, this might be a way of balancing the cost of doing this work, is sharing it among contractors. So if a contractor usually charges $60 per hour, says that they'll work on this project for $50 an hour, that other $10 per hour is match. Participants, volunteers can be valued at about $28 per hour. But I'm going to say that it's really important to think of your target audience. If people would actually benefit from being paid to attend whatever event it is, you should think really carefully about if you actually need to write that into the grant that they get paid. So just a caveat there. You cannot match federal funding to a federal grant. This is down to the resolution that, let's say someone attends your Zoom call with their US government email, that person's time cannot count towards participant effort. So you have to be very, very, very careful with not matching federal time. There's so much more to that. This is your like taste so that it's not new. All right, we've gotten to actually getting to write the proposal after doing all of that work. So read the request for proposals again. You don't have to read it, quite as much, but get it back in your head and make the outline of the sections that they require and the kinds of information that needs to be included. So luckily in this RFP, they summarized it, which is amazing. So they have a cover page, and then they have the requirements. So it has to be which typeface and how many pages. Okay. You'll notice this tip again, use the exact words and phrases that are in the request for proposals so it's easy for the reader to find the information. So for example, here they say project design and methods. Make sure that your section heading in your proposal says project design and methods, and you don't write something like project implementation, right? Use their words because that's what their reviewers are looking for, and then they'll know that you did that. This are my general tips for clear writing. This is based on this wonderful book. I proselytize it. It literally changed my life. This book literally changed my life. So feel free to grab a copy from your library and check it out. If it doesn't work for you, no worries, but I thought it was amazing. This book teaches you that your job is to make it easy for the reader to nod along with what you're doing. That is your job. It takes a lot of work to do that. Also, you're never going to be a good editor of your own writing. And so you just always have to have someone else read it. It can be a coworker, there's professional proofreaders, there's, your cousin. Have someone else read your writing and just give you some feedback of what doesn't make sense, because it's hard for you to tell because it's good. So that is my number one tip. If you don't do anything else, make sure somebody else reads this before you submit it. Couple of other notes. Grammatically correct writing is not the same as clear writing. So for example, the lack of media support was the cause of our election loss is a grammatically correct sentence, but it is not at all as clear as we lost the election because the media did not support us, right? Like it's intuitive once you read it, but it's amazing how easy it is for us to want to express lofty ideas and try to use really complex language. But really, this is much clearer, simpler and clearer. And likewise, you can break the rules if it has a specific effect that you want. Children need to eat and children need to feel safe. The rule is that you're not supposed to start a sentence with and, but we wanted to use it for effect. So some things don't let you frame your argument yourself. There's like, you have to copy and paste into a form or something like that. And so they dictate the order that you present information to. But if you have a choice, if you just have a blank page in front of you, this is a good strategy, or it is a strategy that has worked for me, I should say. There are other strategies that will also work and also be good. So paragraph 1 is the big picture. What is our shared context and why is it important? That's the key. Why is it important? So the sky is blue, and that shows us that the air is healthy for us to breathe, which is currently not true in Albuquerque. It is nasty out there. So we've told us what we've said, this observation, we can all agree, we have this shared context that the sky is blue, and here's why it's important. Paragraph 2, what's the problem? And hopefully because you've spent the time in paragraph 1 saying why the thing is important, now the reader will be like, oh, this problem is important also, right? So the sky is turning yellow. That's a big problem. Paragraph 3 could be, how does what you're proposing address the problem? What is unique and awesome about your idea? And how does it fit the budget and the timescale and the logic? Remember the logic of the grant. So here's my example of why the logic is important. So for example, someone could say, therefore, the sky is turning yellow. Therefore, we propose to deploy thousands of hot air balloons so the sky looks blue again. Our logic model hopefully would have flagged that this is not the best use of our budget. Instead of, we'll train teens to ride and tune up their bikes to address urban air pollution, right? And then only when you've done that do you get to the nitty-gritty of the details. Remember, I said way a long time ago that the activities are the easiest thing for our brains to latch onto. So a lot of people will go straight in and say, we're going to thin the forest and we're going to teach kids to train, blah, 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 right? And you get really excited, but you haven't given the audience that space to breathe and understand why it's important. And so this framework of taking a big picture, why it's important, what the problem is, and then how you're going to find the solution gives the reader a time to nod along with you so that when you get to the details, they're with you. They want you to succeed. All right, my last two, these are things that I get into. Don't have time to explain the whole thing. And again, I'll refer you to this book because they have whole sections on each of these topics. Let verbs be verbs. Sometimes we try to make them into nouns. So for example, there was an affirmative decision for expansion. Again, that's a grammatically correct sentence, but that is not as clear as the director decided to expand the program. Those verbs move the sentence forward. The reader feels the movement of them. And again, it's this nodding along, like, yeah, the director decided to expand the program, you know? Make the subject of the sentence do the action. So here's an example. A walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Red Riding Hood. Again, grammatically correct. Red Riding Hood walked through the woods. It's so much clearer. It's not that neither are correct, but it just feels better, right? As a reader. And again, our job is to make it easy on the reader. Great. Okay, well, I had more. This is something that I catch all the time. Having topic sentences is really helpful. Tell the reader what you're about to say in the paragraph. Then the key is sometimes I read excellent topic sentences, and then there's something different in the paragraph. That's just one of my pet peeves, but since I was the invited speaker, I got to talk about it. This is critical, and I've said it once before. Pick an order and use the exact same order throughout the entire document. That reduces the strain on the reader of switching, right? So for example, if my deliverables are a webinar, a white paper, and a podcast, that's the order that I'm going to present them in every single time, including the budget and the timeline. I'm always going to make sure that they're presented in the same order. It's very satisfying to the reader that they're not expending mental energy and going, wait, is that different? Right? They're like, oh, this is the same. This is the same. It's very easy for your reader to nod along. And then avoid abbreviations. So it feels repetitive to you, but the reader doesn't remember what RFP is when you said it 4 pages ago. So if anyone caught it, I left RFP in one time in this presentation, and everywhere else I spelled it out. And I'm wondering if anyone noticed and was like, what was RFP? So I did that on purpose. And sometimes if space is really a constraint, I would just say it's better to rewrite and avoid abbreviations if you can help it. All right, we are getting there. So you are now in the editing stage. Often the request for proposals will give you a review and selection process or a criteria. And so you're going to cross-check what you wrote and make sure that you have met, checklist, all of the things on this criteria. Okay. And because sometimes they'll assign things like points, if you have limited time for the budget, spend the most time on the sections that give you the most points. I'm running so slow. Okay. Work, check in on grants.gov before the deadline. Make sure you're the person who can submit the grant and it's not an administrator or something else. That is key. Make sure that you know if there's sneaky other required documents, because sometimes there are. So for example, a list of congressional districts often has to be a separate upload. The area of work is often a separate upload, and it's often not reported in the request for proposals. So definitely check in on grants.gov sooner than the deadline day. I understand if people have to jump off. I'm good to go for another couple of minutes, and we will release the recording recording if you have to go. And I'm sorry that I ran over. I got too excited. But so ta-ta if you have to step off. Otherwise, I've just got a couple more slides. All right. So as I mentioned, doing the budget narrative last is very helpful. Hopefully they'll give you an example budget narrative in whatever form and amount of detail that they want. If they don't, you can reach out to the program officer, because otherwise you could spend as much time, it could just sort of be an endless amount of time where you're explaining your budget. But generally, you're going to match the categories with some explanation of how it matches the activities that you laid out in other parts of the proposal. Yeah. All right, you have made it. You have completed your proposal. Someone else has read it. You've made your edits. You're ready to upload it. This is, give yourself at least a half a day to upload to grants.gov because you're going to have to upload it. Then you're going to have to check it. And something didn't upload, and you're going to have to re-upload it. Then you're going to have to check the PDF, and it changed the formatting, and you're going to have to re-upload it. So give yourself a half a day, at least. Right. So that's one of the things. Make sure conversion to PDF doesn't mess with your page limits, or if you have figures or tables, sometimes the formatting can get weird. So you have to double check. The number one most important tip is make sure you hit send. So I have almost missed a deadline because I almost forget to hit send after hours of uploading. So please remember to hit send. Okay, so, I only went 1 minute over, so great. So here's a summary of my grant writing workflow. Some tips on clear writing. I refer you to that book. Once you hit submit, it is time to celebrate, because just getting the grant done is a huge accomplishment, and you're heading towards your goals. So thanks so much for having me and let me talk about this.
Oh my goodness, Eva. Thank you so very much. I know that I have learned a ton, and I'm sure others feel the same. Thank you everyone for participating in the chat and making things fun. I believe Gail is joining us via phone. So Gail will make sure that you have a copy of the recording as well as the chat. Regarding the chat, I'm putting a link to an evaluation for the workshop that we had today. We want your feedback. It means a lot to us, especially as we're looking forward to having another one of these in July. So any feedback that you have, we're going to be really grateful for to help us continue to make this something that is useful and beneficial to you and to so many others. In the email that will go out today, Eva had referenced a number of resources. We're going to put those in there. This eval will be in there as well as some dates for these future lunch workshops. So, and the recording. Yeah, so keep your eye out for that. Feel free to share it. This is meant to be absolutely just available to anyone who thinks it might be useful. Feel free to stick around for a couple minutes if you have additional questions. If you can also reach out to us directly, and we can try to get you set up with the right answers or answers to the best of our ability. And we look forward to seeing you all again. Hope you have a great day and stay hydrated out there.